Welcome back to episode 19 of What's on Your Workbench. Welcome back to the podcast. It is great to have you here as we find out what's been on our workbench, what's on our workbench, what's going to be on our workbench. Actually, we're not even going to be talking about that this week. We're going to be talking about what was previously on our workbench. So as of course with me is Chili from WOYWBE Solutions. How are you doing?
I am doing wonderful. How about you?
I'm doing good. I should probably introduce myself. I am Andrew with craftybeetroot.com. We'll get this thing down one day, maybe after another 20 episodes. But today we have a bit of a special episode. Normally we always talk about what's on our workbench, but today we wanted to touch on a topic that's very new to me, was very important part of your life, and is kind of maybe phasing out. But we're going to talk about commissions. And specifically, we're going to talk about our first commissions. Now, I know this is going back quite a bit for you, but for me, I've been making for, I would say, on a hobbyist level for the last 4 or 5 years. And I recently took my first commission. I was in the middle of working on some medieval costumes, and I realized that fabric is expensive. And as I have a family, I can't justify spending copious amounts on pure wool fabrics as much as I would like to. And so I threw it out to my internet following of family and friends and went, hey, I do watercolors. I enjoy doing it. I do these cool things for my family and do it for my wife every Mother's Day. I make these cool silhouette kind of pictures. And the internet responded and went, we don't want that. We want you to make a custom wooden card holder. And that is how my first commission went. I was like, hey, I've got this kind of product that I do on the side. I need some extra cash. If anybody would like kind of this cool thing, I'm happy to do it, and for a little bit of cash, and then I can kind of top up my coffers. And somebody went, hey, I know you do woodwork. Could you make one of these? And that's how my first commission went. I went, look, it was a back and forth. It was actually a friend or somebody that I go to church with. And yeah, she was a follower of my Facebook page, which I don't normally talk about because that's more of a family thing. It's crafted by Hagi Hands. It is a public Facebook website if people are interested. But yeah, and so I put out this call to do some paintings, which I thought out of all the stuff I make, that's the kind of thing that someone went, oh yeah, that's cool. I'll get that for my mother or my father or, something like that. And yeah, they went, no, I saw this thing on eBay. I didn't want to pay $30 in shipping. Could you make it? And that's what I made. And so I've actually got one here. And it actually turned out to be quite a fun little project. So what it is it's for those that can't see, is it's a card holder. So you can, or probably I think about 20 centimeters, so 7 or 8 inches in length, and it's got 2 stacks, and it's basically just a saw width cut through it, so you can hold cards in it. So you could probably hold about 6 or 7 cards at the top and 6 or 7 cards at the bottom, and then it's got a little bit of velvet fabric on the bottom. And this was for her grandchildren, for when they're playing games like Ticket to Ride or things like that, where you have to hold the cards for quite a long period of time, and kids do this with cards. And so I thought, yeah, that's great. I can make that. And she had basically said, look, she didn't really know what price, and we'll get into price because that's where commissions discussions live. But she basically had a price that, hey, it was going to cost, I think, $40 for 4 of them, and $20 of that was shipping. And she was like, well, if you can do it for the same price, that way I don't have to pay for shipping and I can help somebody out. And so I said, sure. And I think it was like that afternoon, I went out into the workshop and I looked around the shop and found some old wood and cut it down with a circular saw. And I think within a few hours, I'd thrown it together, and it actually worked out really well. And on that first piece, I think I made 8 in total, and I ended up giving 4 or selling 4, and I kept the rest 4 at the house. And my kids actually, it turned out to be really practical. So I'm glad I actually made it. But that actually led into my second commission because somebody else saw that and went, hey, could you make me some? I was like, oh, okay. So I just went out and made it again. And those to date are my only commissions ever. But it was an extra, I think I ended up $60, $70 or so extra, which was great. It helped out a lot with my little fabric projects because it's very easy to spend that kind of money and disappear. But yeah, so that was my first experience with a commission. It was, I went out asking for commissions for a particular skill and I got something completely different, but it ended up kind of seeding a couple opportunities for me. How about you, Chile? How was your first commission? How did that go?
Man, that was exciting. When I first started Orwood, I was really focusing on well, honestly, I was focusing on all the wrong things. I was trying to find a venue through which I could sell the things I make. But the hard thing about that is that I don't make anything in mass production. Everything is one-offs. And there was nowhere around Colorado that I could find that really did this, that, you know, was interested at all or saw any value in selling this kind of handcrafted, you know, bespoke stuff. And I was getting really frustrated with it. But I was just making, I was just building things. You know, a lot of what I do is repurposing materials. So I was starting to just acquire some really cool stuff and say, what can I make out of this? So like if you look on, you know, my website stuff, you'll find things like the Dewey sideboard, which is a sideboard that I made out of a old metal card catalog, you know, kind of box, and took some of the drawers out and replaced them with wooden drawers and made a really cool kind of cherry stand for it. And I was just doing things like that. And, you know, somebody saw the stuff that I was posting. It's like, here's the kind of stuff I'm making. And they came to me with a project that I had no idea what it was. At first, when they approached me, she said, I want somebody to make a baking table. And I was like, awesome, I'm in. What is it? So this person is a prolific baker. I mean, she bakes all the time. Like, I don't think there's a week that goes by that she hasn't baked something, bread, cookies, you know, all sorts of stuff. So she told me, well, it's like a counter height table that has 3 sides on it. So that you don't have to like chase your rolling pin when it rolls off the table, and, you know, everything's kind of contained. And so I started looking up some, you know, some examples of them and stuff. And most of what comes up is very commercial or industrial scale, you know, stainless steel. They're for restaurants and, you know, for bakeries and stuff like that. And I was like, oh, we can totally do this. So I ended up making one completely of urban forested timber and reclaimed metal. I happen to have some really awesome, like 1.5-inch solid hexagonal stock steel that I had stumbled across, which is really weird and like you don't find that. Like, so I was like, yeah, this is cool. So I ended up using that for the legs, and, you know, built the entire frame structure out of metal. Made some hand twisted metal gussets. The tabletop was all elm, as were the sides and the back. And then in the back piece, I inset a cast iron piece from an old park bench, like lattice work, you know, is what it looks like.
Yep.
And did that in the back. And then because I can't just do something the way it's been seen, I decided, well, what would be really cool is on the underside of the table to mount a a stainless steel bin that you can like store a rolling pin or that kind of stuff in. You don't have to have it on the tabletop. You can be out of your way. But what if there was a second one under the other side that was a waste bin that you could scrape all your waste into? And I was like, that'd be really cool, but it'd be messy trying to aim it, and get it in there. So then I put a tapered hole in the top that has a plug. And so you could take this, plug out, scrape everything into the hole, and then when you're completely done baking for the day, pull that tray out and dump it. So it was so much fun, and it was super exciting, and really made me realize like this is what I want to do. I want to solve problems for people.
Yeah.
And have other people bring me the ideas and say, this is what I want, or this is what I have. What can you do with it? And yeah, that was the beginning of what ended up being the framework for how I do work through Orwin.
Oh, that's awesome. It's like most of my life is making things that solve my problems. But it's definitely a very different experience to solve somebody else's problem, because you feel like, well, is this what they want, or am I, is this something that I'm fulfilling a need that they don't actually need? And it's definitely for me it took a lot, because a lot of the stuff I mean, we talked about it on the previous episode. I make stuff that's good enough for me, and I am fairly flexible. Like, I love high quality finished things, but I can live with it not being that. I want it to be practical. I love seeing the tool marks. I love seeing the history. And that's why I enjoy restoring or giving new life to old things, because I can see that history through the layers, and I don't have to be perfect, because I'm just like, well, I'm just in that next part of its life. And then in 10 years time, I'll probably have to fix it up again. And so for me, when I was making just even these card holders, it was trying to figure out, am I good enough to actually make this? Fortunately for me, I was tackling something that I feel I was good enough to do. How was that experience for you? Like, I mean, obviously you've got a much higher background in craftswork, but I'm sure there was still an aspect of that when you were selling it, because it's something, I mean, I give a lot of stuff away that I've made, but to actually sell it, I'm just like, oh, is this good enough? Like, is it really good enough? How was that experience for you?
I was horrible at it. First time. I mean, everything turned out great. My client loved it, still loves it to this day, and uses it, like I said, weekly. I would say she is in love with it, which is awesome. It's a great feeling. But I've learned so much more since then about how to really approach that process with a client, for me at least. It differs for different craft workers. For me, I am always more harsh about picking apart a piece than my clients ever are. But there are some things that I've learned through experience that I have to do for the way I do business. So for instance, I had to learn how to become a good detective. I had to learn how to efficiently ask questions to my clients, to pull out the information that they don't even realize they need to give me.
Yep.
So that I can create a solution that is that meets their needs, but exceeds their expectations.
Yep.
So that's my goal for every project is I want to meet my clients' needs, but I want to exceed their expectations. And part of the way I do that is, we have to talk about expectations. For me, one of those things is if you're looking for something that is perfect to the point of sterility, then buy it from a machine.
Yep.
Because that's not what I do. I do work by hand. And what that means is that no, it's not perfect, but it has character. And it's a lot of those things are things that you really don't even notice. You don't perceive right away. Um, but there's a very innate human reaction to small flaws.
Yeah.
A piece has life and warmth to it when it's imperfect.
Yeah, this is something I've discovered, and I've actually talked about it in tutorials on YouTube about making cards for people. And I make the statement, and this is what it reminds me of, is don't be afraid to show your hand in what you've made, especially something like a card where it is so easy to go and buy something. If you've made it by hand, it's not going to be perfect. And I mean, I shudder with some of the stuff that I've made years and years and years ago, but I still look at it and I go, well, that was from me. And that means something to people. It doesn't mean anything to me because I'm just like, whatever, I can turn these things out by the hundreds and it doesn't. But to other people, that means something. And yeah, I guess I've never even thought about it that way because I always compare myself to the machine and I go, well, I can't do it as good as a machine. What's the point of even doing it? And I'm struggling with that with some of my projects at the moment where I'm just like, oh, it's not good enough. Like, it's not good enough. Why do I even bother? Why do I even bother? And I know that will pass. But it's interesting hearing it from your perspective, that just getting those expectations clear at the start, and making it clear that it is going to be handmade. It isn't going to be perfect, but a machine isn't perfect either. And I mean, you get this in your head where you're like, oh, the machine always does it perfectly. But then, you pull up, like you look at your jumper or your jacket or whatever, and you pull it apart and you're like, oh, this is terrible. Like, this isn't made properly. That isn't made properly. And then you start to be okay with that hand finish isn't a bad finish. It's just different.
Yeah. Yeah. I've gotten hounded before because I hide my signature on all my pieces. It's a Where's Waldo. I never, ever, ever put my signature in an obvious place. And my signature is legitimately a signature. I don't use a stamp or a brand on my pieces. I do everything by hand. So if it's metalwork, I etch it in. And if it's woodwork, I use a hand, wood burner and sign everything. But I always hide it. And I've had, clients ask me, like, why do you hide it? Like, it should be somewhere where it's visible. And I said, well, the whole piece is my signature.
Yeah.
Everything here has been touched by my hands. It is my signature. This is just my name.
Yeah. And I mean, it's one of my biggest annoyances with, again, going back to kind of my hobby, is like the props. Like, there'll be this awesome prop from a movie, and then they'll go put a signature right in the middle of it. It's like, the signature doesn't mean anything. I want the piece, the story of the piece. The signature, it's nice to have, but hide it away. I mean, it's like, imagine a piece of artwork and then putting a signature right in the middle of it. It's like, that's not, I appreciate that it's from the artist, and that's why I'm purchasing this thing. That's my appreciation. I don't want to see that signature in my face. I want it there for verification at a later date, possibly. But yeah, like you said, that's only part. It's such a small part of the overall artwork. Or like you said, it's every piece of it is part of you, especially for the stuff that you make, where it's custom designed, custom made, handmade. I mean, I feel like when I'm looking at different stuff you put up, it's like, oh, that looks like something Chili did. Oh, it is something he did, kind of thing, because you can tell that unique approach to the situation.
Yeah, which is weird because that's weird to hear, because I don't feel like I've really found yet even necessarily my own style. Like, I don't feel a real strong sense of identity when I look at the body of work I've done. But I have heard that from others as well, that they can tell when it's something I've done. Which I just find really weird.
Well, I mean, it's definitely one of those things where there's some pieces that are more you than others. Like, anytime, like the one you just described, your first commission is quite clear, like that encompasses everything that All Wood Solutions has kind of tried to send out into the ether. My first commission is very much got nothing. That's definitely not me at all, but that's okay. I'm not. That was more of a quick grab for cash. And I guess that's a very different approach. Is that was for you the start of the journey into your own business, into creating this identity and potentially a future income, while for me it was more just fuel the hobby.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think the other thing that you touched on a little bit earlier that we should probably talk about that has changed a lot for me from that first commission is pricing.
the
Uh,
the
so,
the hardest
one of
thing.
the oh yeah, and you brought up a really good point in your piece, of one of the factors that comes in is what somebody can get this for elsewhere. Um, and
Yep.
that will forever and always be a factor, no matter what you're doing, and how you're doing it. It's always a factor. Um, and how you address that is really, that really depends on your craft, and in your business approach.
Yeah.
Um,
And unfortunately, you're always tied to something is worth as much as somebody's willing to pay for it.
yeah,
And that's there's no way to sugarcoat it. And for some reason, some things have got a much higher perceived value than other things. Um, and then I guess it's up to you to try and figure out if that works for you, to sell it at that price. Um, and unfortunately, something like bespoke furniture, the perceived value is much, much lower than what it should be. And
yeah,
my favorite saying from when I was in sales is perception is reality. If people perceive something is worth $100, then to them it's worth $100. No matter how much you convince them otherwise, unfortunately, that's just not going to work until that perception changes.
yeah. And that's the fun thing about it though too, though, is that yeah, for one person that perceived value might be $100, or for somebody else that perceived value might be 1,000, and for another person the perceived value might be priceless because of sentimental value.
Yep.
And so you really have to learn a bit about psychology, in going about this. So my first commission, um, was 100%. The pricing was 100% done on what this person was willing to pay. Like that's it. Like I broke even, and that was about it. I didn't
And
make any money on it.
and when you're saying broke even, does that include covering your wage or not?
No,
Okay, so
no.
that's something that it kind of opened my eyes, is that when you're running your own business, your wage should be considered part of your expenses. So just like
Yeah,
buying the wood, that you're paying yourself should be part of that. You shouldn't consider the profit the paying of you. But I mean, yeah, we've all got to start somewhere. And
yep.
like you said, it's
I made. Do you want to know what my hourly wage was on that first project?
well, by the sounds of it, it was zero.
No, no, it wasn't.
Wasn't
It
quite
wasn't
zero.
zero, but
Oh, okay.
it was $2.16 an
Nice.
hour. Yeah. But I mean, it paid off in the
Yep.
long run because one, it's a piece I'm to this day very proud of, and other people really appreciate and love it. And it shows it's a good representation of my work. So, I mean, at that
Yep.
stage in the game, it was definitely not a loss.
Yep.
It had value. But yeah, I've had to come to realize now, like, okay, I have a value, to my labor. And so I have a set point, a starting point of this is where, my labor rate, needs to start. But there's flexibility in that too. I have some fudge factor in that, if I need to drop my labor rate a little bit to make something happen, I can, and I'm not hurting myself. Um, and there's some projects that I'm like, well, this is incredibly complex. This really is going to, take some skills that you're not going to find in another person readily.
Yep.
And my labor rate goes up for that. When it comes to replicating carvings, for instance, like I had somebody that had a corbel. They bought an old house in Denver, and the one of the corbels was missing from above a fireplace. Which, if you're not familiar with what that is, it's basically an angle bracket that holds up a shelf or change in depth of architecture. So it's a structural piece, but they're often decorative as well. So one of them was gone, when they bought this place, and they decided they wanted to try to restore, this portion of the house to its former glory. So she brought me the existing corbel that they had left. They took it off the wall, brought it in, and said, I need another one of these. And she had looked around for months and months and months to find somebody to do this, like looking out of state and everything, and nobody really had any interest in it. And I said, yeah, I can do it, most definitely. It's just a matter of how much do you want it done.
Yeah.
And she was like, well, I don't really have a budget in mind for it, which is always one of my questions to a client is, what's your budget? And I asked that early on, largely for the reason of finding out if this person is realistic at all. If your budget is, $600 for an $800 project, we can discuss. I can kind of come to terms with you on some stuff.
Yeah, we can cut some corners or change some materials.
Yeah. If your budget's $100 for an $800 project, I'm just going to tell you right now, like, there's really no need even discussing this. So yeah, she said, okay, I don't really have a budget. And I said, well, I can tell you that most things I give a hard quote on, stuff like that, and furniture restoration, I don't. I said, I can give you an estimate, on what I think it's going to take me, but I'm always going to find things as I get into it. And said, so I think, I think it's probably going to cost about $400. But it may vary, and if it's going to go way over that, I'm going to contact you beforehand. But so yeah, it's a huge game. And I mean, this person was like, $400 deal, I don't care, nobody else wants to touch this, like, I want it done. Was that one corbel, worth $400?
It was to her, and that's all that matters.
I can put that on eBay and sell it for $400. It's one corbel.
Yeah, exactly.
But in her situation and her needs, there was a perceived value there that was far greater than that.
Yep. Yeah, and I mean, my favorite example is quilts. Because quilts are, you see them everywhere, right? You walk into a house, you see these quilts, but nobody ever goes and buys a quilt, or very rarely. So if you ever make a quilt, there's this value in that, like just in the materials alone, and getting it sewn and getting it quilted. You're usually looking at about a couple $100. Nobody ever really goes and buys a quilt for $200. And yet people love making them. People know how much they are, but people refuse to buy them. So the only way to get a quilt is to be given one or to make one realistically. And it's a very fascinating hobby that you see out there, that there's no way to value, like the perceived value of something like that is people go, oh, maybe $150, maybe $100, I'll pay for that. But to make it, and especially those high quality ones, it's like, it is truly a labor of love. Furniture making is almost in that realm now as well, where to have it handmade, people just cannot believe the cost. Like that perception is just so far removed that unless, like, you see a bespoke piece of furniture now, you can almost guarantee that they made it themselves or they inherited it, because the chances of them actually going and buying it somewhere is very, very unlikely. And my favorite example is my costumes, right? Like people are like, oh, that's cool. Can you make me this for Halloween? And you're like, sure, if you're willing to spend $400 just for materials. And then their mind's like, oh, okay. Like it's like these things aren't cheap. And it's such a cottage industry of, well, not even a cottage industry, it's such a small industry around there that if you want it, you can buy it, but you're going to be commissioning people, which means you're going to get something way better than what you probably were expecting, but you're going to pay way more. And until you've kind of dabbled your toe in that, you don't really know the prices. Another good example is paintings. Lots of people paint out there. To get what I would call a good painting, you usually are starting at $150 to $300-400, depending on the size of the painting. But for like kind of an A4 size painting, up to about an A3, you can pick up a good painting for that. But you can't pick up one cheaper than that unless somebody's basically throwing one out. And so you see these hard cutoffs. And it's definitely an interesting thing that I've noticed looking at prices, because I do like to buy some of that artisan stuff, but a lot of the times I can't afford the really nice stuff. And it's definitely in the prop community. This is always a big topic about commissions, and because people, they see a lightsaber and they go, that's cool, I want one. How much does that cost? And it's like, okay, well, do you want it painted, weathered, and finished? Do you want just the kit? Do you just want the patterns? How do you want it? Like, is this for fun? Is this for something you're giving away? And all those things affect that price. And like I said, I've done some work in sales, but at a very, very different level. And it's fascinating to me that it still comes back to that perception. If somebody wants it, there's money out there for people to do it, for people to buy it. But people have to have that want. And it's such an interesting problem to figure out. And for me, I have a day job, and it always cracks me up. Like this leather suitcase, for example, that I was talking about in the last episode, that I still just happen to have by me. It in parts, like that's got a whole bunch of raw leather or veg tanned leather with stains. So it's probably $150, $100 just in leather. It's got probably, by the time you add up all the different hardware elements, it's $50 to $100 in rivets and latches and hinges, and it's probably more like $50. It's got custom printed fabric that somebody actually made, and I actually contacted them when they made their suitcase and they sent it to me, but then it's like another $50, $100. So you're looking at like $250 just for that fabric, and then all the time to make it. Like that's not even including the time. But there's no way I could sell that. And so that's how I end up having it. But if I want that thing, and this is where all these makers are coming from, is that they want these things and they can't afford it. And so they go, well, the only way to do it is to do it myself, which I find is such a fascinating endpoint that back, 100, 200 years ago, you had no choice but to purchase these one-off items. Now we've got all these machine stuff, but people still want that thing that they used to have, and they can't afford it. So now they're going back to having to make it. When if you go back 200 years, nobody was making furniture and then on the side making clothes and then on the side making leather goods, because they didn't have the skills to do it. And we don't really have the skills to do it now either, but you don't have a choice. And it's such a fascinating thing now that we are seeing things like Etsy that are a lot bigger now. Unfortunately, Etsy, I think, has gone downhill a little bit, but where people can go and actually see the true value of some of these pieces of like these items.
Yeah, to me, it's really interesting that, like I talk to a lot of my clients about is that there's a huge issue of quality versus quantity here, and I mean that in a number of ways. From the very basic of economies of scale. Yes, that suitcase, for instance, has $150 worth of leather in it for you.
Yeah.
If you're somebody who is buying on a massive scale, it's $40 worth of of leather. So there's that, in terms of quantity, but also, I have the conversation with a lot of my clients of, what's the favorite thing, your most prized possession, that if your house is on fire, the one thing you're going to run back in and get. And the overwhelming majority of the time, people answer with something like, my grandfather's pocket watch, my great grandmother's necklace. It's something that's an heirloom piece that was made by a craft worker, and is such high quality that it's handed down through generation and generation and generation. And I ask my clients, what have you ever purchased in your life that you're going to be able to hand down to your children? And most of them have nothing.
Yep.
Because it's not going to be your IKEA, fold flat furniture. I can tell you that. They don't want that.
Hey,
they don't want it now, let alone in 20 years.
That chipboard is quality chipboard.
Yeah. And so, that's one of the things we discuss about, quality versus quantity. And we're all guilty of this. I mean, I could have a much higher quality car, if I wanted, if I was willing to not acquire a lot of the other stuff I acquire. But I don't, because I have a breadth of wants instead of just a depth. So that, that's one of the really interesting things. The other thing is that when it comes to perceived value, where you see really that change, like you were talking about quilts. And Katie, my wife, and I have talked about this because she crochets. So with Afghans, and other things, it's very, very similar in that people don't realize that Afghan costs like $400 to $600, to make, between materials and time. But where that changes is when people start to perceive an element of artistry, which is, a unique voice within a piece. That's where things really start to change.
It's got to be custom.
Yeah. Like, for instance, we actually do have a quilt. And I use that term a bit loosely. I'll explain why in a moment. We have an heirloom quilt in our house that is probably worth over $1,000 easily. Like, people would easily fork over that money to take it off our hands, which will never happen because it is an heirloom piece. But it was Katie's great grandma who made it. And she made it from her daughter's clothes, old clothes. And what she did was she cut out a circle from the clothing, and then she stitched it together, kind of like the buttons you were talking about before. Yep. Bringing it in, only she only did it once. Yep. To make it a round.
Oh, okay. Yep.
Yeah, rosette. Thank you. And then there are easily 2,500 of these rosettes, which were all hand done.
Yep.
Which are then in turn hand stitched together to make this enormous quilt. It covers our king size bed and then some.
Wow.
And it's all these rosettes with negative space in between them. It's incredibly delicate. It is unimaginably beautiful. And that's why people start to, hit that switch in their head where they're like, oh yeah, this has value.
Yeah.
Because they see the uniqueness and the artistry in it. And the cool thing is we are starting to see that more with some crafts, quilting being one of them, vintage quilts. There's a growing market and interest in that as people understand the labor and especially it's almost like a vintage car. If you have the provenance to it, the story, documented behind it, people engage with that. Which that's part of why all of my custom pieces that I do, they all come with a story. Mm. They all get a name and they come with literally a story written out about them. Because that's what engages clients. And that's what my clients don't get anywhere else. Yes, they can have somebody else make a table. No, that table's not going to have this character, provenance, and story that comes with it, though.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it comes down to people like you said, they yearn for that custom nature, that story, that thing that makes them special because they've got this piece that's special. Now for a lot of people, they don't care about that stuff, and then it's trying to bridge that gap of like, okay, you want that, it's not just add 20%, you've got to triple the price or quadruple the price, but you get so much more out of it. Like for me, it's with a piece of your furniture, if it ever broke, I mean, A, you would be there to help fix it, but B, it can be fixed. And kind of like I've mentioned on previous podcasts, people don't save money by making something. You save money by fixing things. Like if you fix a hole in a pair of socks, you could have potentially doubled the life of that pair of socks. You making a pair of socks, you're not going to save any money. And it's the same, like you buy those high quality furnitures and you get that built-in lifespan and that heirloom quality. And it's like, this is why when me and my wife got married, we went and bought, it's not artisan made, but it's all solid hardwood bedroom set. And it's been now traveled all over the world. And it's interesting the people you come across, because you really do see this distinct line of people that people were just like, oh, you're coming to a different country, just sell everything and buy new stuff. And I'm just like, what? I would prefer to have nothing in my house except for one nice piece of furniture that has my whole life story than to have a house full of IKEA furniture that is just, to me, dead inside. But the problem is the value of that. And the best way to capture this is custom pieces. So if you look at, I mean, for me, I'm going to defer to guns because that's kind of what I know a bit about, but cars and vehicles are the same way. If you have an old, whatever, 80-year-old car that's original, it's worth a lot more than one that was customized 80 years ago. And it's the same with like guns. Like people will get a custom paint job on it or put custom pieces on it, or they'll get it changed, and immediately it loses value. But to me, that kind of underlines the problem is that people want this customization, but they want it custom to them. And then it's only over time that those things get value. It's kind of like if I got a portrait painted of myself, that's good for me. But once it goes into somebody else's hands, they think this is millions of dollars. It's going, no, they think it's useless. And that's where you've got to try. And that's where a good artisan like yourself bridges that gap, and they make it so that it's custom for them, but also it supersedes that as well. And that's what people don't realize is that you can go on Etsy and get any old person to paint a custom picture of you, but you can't, to get somebody to get a custom picture that means something to you, but also supersedes that, is where that true artistic, skill is. And that's where the true value is that this thing that was custom made, like made out of baby clothes, now supersedes that, because now nobody cares about that. All they see is the artistic beauty in it and the history in it. And that's what, again, people like, there's a value to that, but it's so hard to put a monetary value on that.
It is. Yeah, it really is. So I guess all of this being said, if we fast forward to today, this, my process for quoting is far different, than where I started. Now I look at, I don't just look at my material costs. I mark up those costs. So there's a margin on materials, as well as my labor rate. And I'll tell you that I still I don't clear what my labor rate is set at. That's not what I'm making, because I always go over, always, every single time, because of my own decision making. I plan on doing something one way, and then I get 3/4 of the way through it, and I go, yeah, but it'd be really cool if I do this too. Which is part of that exceeding expectations
Yeah.
part. I'm still meeting needs, but I want to do that little bit more to exceed a customer's expectations. And in all honesty, that is done out of pure vanity, because I love the reactions from my clients. I
Yeah.
love seeing them be awestruck when I reveal a piece. I love when this sounds terrible, but I love when a client cries. I love when they're speechless. Like, that lets me know that they in that moment completely understand what it's about.
Yeah. And they're not being polite, uh you've both had a good transaction at that point.
Yeah.
And I guess that's, yeah, I guess if we want to finish on any points, it's you've got to have value in your work, but it's always going to be a challenge. But I think more importantly, that if you are looking for something good and a good piece of furniture, seek out these artisans and these craftspeople, because you don't know how much, like, that piece of furniture might mean a lot to you, but you seeking them out and purchasing it from them will mean a lot more to them even, than it will to you, because they're in that process. And that's just, you just don't get that from a piece of IKEA furniture. And don't get me wrong, that has its place. But when you are buying, that one-off piece, and you are a bit older and you've got a bit more money, you won't regret it. You'll regret it when you pay for it, but 5 minutes after that, you'll never regret that decision. You'll look back and be like, yep. I mean, that's how I approach things when I make them. It's like, oh, I don't want to spend an extra hour doing that. But then I'm like, when it's finished, I'm not going to remember that extra hour. You won't remember that extra $1,000 you spent on that thing. Yeah, it'll be fine.
No, it's going to become a part of your world.
Yeah.
Um,
And
and that's a special thing. That it really is.
And I mean, people get hung up on, oh, don't be materialistic or whatever. And it's like, you are being materialistic because you're tied to this thing, but it's not the thing that's important. It's the memories, it's the stories, it's I don't ever have to worry about that breaking, or it's even for your children or whoever eventually inherit it, or if somebody else buys it, it all adds to that value. It's just a value that we don't often include in that price, which we should.
Yeah. It's it is that sentimental value, that it's really hard to sell when the sentiment isn't there yet.
Yep.
But like, for instance, we used to have a dining room table, that was not a quality piece of furniture. It was a turd, and it was like 40 years old, but it was our favorite. And the part of the reason for that was that it came from my aunt and uncle's lake cabin, where I grew up going every summer and played countless nights of cards with family around that table. And there was just something about it that was so comforting, and wonderful, that table had a ton of value to me. And that's what I try to explain to clients, is that this isn't going to be a table in 10 years. In 10 years, this is going to be 10 years of memories with your family. It's going to be something that your kids inherit, from your estate, and maybe even fight over, just because they, each of them have such an attachment to it. And it's been an important part, an important fixture in their lives.
Yeah.
Like, that's where the money is.
Well, and it's not only that, it's you don't ever have to think about purchasing that again, because nothing annoys me more than buying like a couch and knowing that in 5 years' time you're going to have to go through the whole process, and the quality's probably gone down and the price has probably gone down too. And then I look at other stuff that's around the house, and it's just like, yeah, I don't ever have to think about replacing that. That's ours now for, until something terrible happens. We die, or the house burns down, or something like that. And it's okay. I mean, there's a difference between materialistic and just wanting to go and have everything for the sake of having it. And it's really just it's a portal for our memories and our experiences in life, because that is what our life is eventually, is it's a collection of memories. Oh. Got a bit serious there. So I think we've been talking for quite a while, but
Yeah.
oh, very good, very good.
Just the sawdust in the air.
It's the chemicals that I've got leached into my skin. Quickly, before we do our final closeouts, can you give us a hint about what potentially might be on your workbench next week?
Well, probably more of this buffet.
Oh,
I gotta fix my drawers, which doesn't sound as bad as it isn't as bad as it sounds. I have broken drawers that I need to fix.
Never.
How about you?
Well, from my Facebook post, I'm sure you've got an idea, but I will put up something. So for those of you that didn't see, I am in full dollhouse mode at the moment. So it's time to work on that. My daughter's had one for quite a while and it never got finished. So I'm busily making furniture for that. And we'll get into it next week. But dollhouse furniture, it's great. It is. And I will get into it next week because there is so many pluses about making dollhouse furniture. So we will talk about that next week. But if people want to find out more where you're at, Chili.
Yeah, check me out on social media, on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, search Orwood Solutions, and you will be sure to find me. How about you?
I am at craftybeetroot.com. If you search for Crafty Beetroot on YouTube, there are a staggeringly underwhelming amount of videos on there, but you will be underwhelmed, I guarantee that. No, the videos are great. Check them out. Also, if you're interested, these podcasts are available on www.whatsonyourworkbench.podbean.com. For the podcast, we also have a YouTube channel, What's on Your Workbench, and all of these go on both of those weekly. And you should be able to find us on any of your podcast listening apps, iTunes, Spotify, Podbean, whatever you use. So with that, we'll find out next week what's on your workbench.